go. I'm already failing at this video diary thing. This is like the third take of this, and I'm like, I don't think that's how a video diary should work. I think I should just probably chill. You know what I mean? Anyway, I'm going to take my glasses off because they're creating a reflection. You can see how dirty they are as well. Hi, I'm Cheddar Gorgeous, or Mike Atkins, whichever one you prefer. I have many, many names. And I'm doing this is like a little video diary, a development diary, which is very ostentatious for a drag performer like myself. But I'm doing a fun little bit of project work at the moment called Labs, which is a kind of series of collaborative, co-created digital residencies, which aims to kind of create a space for artists to develop work and to make mistakes and, you know, kind of show a little bit of the messiness of the processes we go for, which is, it's interesting for me and kind of quite necessary for me on two accounts, because I think a lot of the time people see drag and they just see the kind of the show, the performance, that moment on stage, and they assume that probably not much work goes into it. You just get up and you do that. But I think for me also, I think the nature of work that I mostly do in drag tends to be a little bit more, a little bit less about kind of getting up and having a good time on stage. So I do a lot of kind of more somber, thoughtful performances. Some people might call them boring or distressing, but you know, it's a niche and that's what I'm going with. So I'm working with Labs to make some digital drag numbers, which I've been doing a lot over the period of the last few months. For reference, for the historical document, we are currently in the middle of a global pandemic of the coronavirus, COVID-19. And as a result of that, I ended up at home in a very, I mean, I like my apartment, but it's very small. I live literally in one room. I've got like a bed deck up there. But I'm very kind of enclosed. And what happened when we went into we're not in a full lockdown anymore. But when we were in kind of full lockdown and it was very, very intense, I moved a lot of stuff to my apartment. I started making these kind of video digital drag numbers, which is something that happened within the drag scene, where we did little digital shows. Lots of people were putting on digital shows all over the world, and you submitted a video or you performed live. And so I started creating a lot of video content that was kind of based around lip sync stuff, but then using the format of the video to kind of tell the story in a different way, in a way that wouldn't really be possible on stage. So, and that was quite interesting for me, and it was a chance for me to rediscover some of the stuff that I did before I did drag. So I used to be, many lifetimes ago, I was a visual anthropologist, but I trained as part of that in documentary making. So I did quite a lot of film training, I did quite a lot of video editing, which was very fortuitous when it came to the situation. But the downside of that was I spent a lot of time by myself in a confined space, in quite an introspective way, ending up producing and directing and performing in and editing and all of that stuff all by myself, which was a very, very intense performance. So I've decided to do that again, but this time with Labs in a bit more of a supportive way. And I think what's really, really lovely about something like Labs is that rather than just working to a gig, which is so much what I'm used to, whether that's working towards a show or working for an advertiser or working for, you know, a private client, I'm able to do some of the stuff that really, really interests me. Which is also a bit of a folly in itself, because sometimes the stuff that interests me is a little bit dark and not very fun. I'm kind of wondering why I do it myself, to be honest with you. Maybe I should just do show tunes. Maybe that's the way forward. I mean, I do like a show tune, don't get me wrong. I do give one of those a go on occasion. But also it's just nice to have that space where you don't have the expectation of a particular product to come out. So it's going to be interesting to see what comes of it. I've got an idea. I think I'm going to make 2 or 3 numbers. I've got an idea of what I'm going to do, but that's subject to change, because what I'm trying to do might be quite challenging, technically. But in addition to challenging technically, I think it's funny because I've had this gig on my calendar. I've had this sort of the labs thing on my calendar now for quite a while, and I've really been putting it off. Really been kind of like going, oh, I don't want to go there. And I think it's because both, particularly the first performance I want to do, the first kind of digital video I want to create, it isn't going to be very draggy. It isn't going to be very fun. And it's going to be very much about an experience of confinement, because obviously when I was planning this, I was experiencing confinement. And so in some respects, it's quite hard to go back there because we've loosened up a little bit now. I think we're about to go into a sort of second lockdown here in the UK, but we've loosened up a little bit. And so I don't really want to go back to that place where I have to think about being trapped. But I'm gonna, because that's part of the process. But beyond it's I think the number's about physical confinement, but it's also about I think it's also about the way that we are trapped within ourselves sometimes, particularly thinking through things like mental health, but also like a concept of static structured identity that I think has become a big part of a lot of young people's lives, my life as a queer person, but the notion of the literal, well, not literal, the notion of the boxes that we create for ourselves. In the number, it's a literal box. That was probably what I was getting at. But it's about the way that I feel like I have created boxes for myself. And some of those boxes come from my perception of others' reading of me. And some of those boxes have come from an attempt to create a position of strength. And some of those boxes have been about protection, and some of those boxes have been about hiding away. But I think all of those boxes have limitations. And I think that's kind of what the number's about. I don't really know. So we'll see how it turns out. And this video's already gone on for far too long. So I'm going to leave this video there.